that doesn't mean that there is absolute consensus.
The way to do it is to make investments in a green economy. The way to do it is to invest in other public goods like public transportation. These are the kinds of things that are really going to accelerate decarbonization. Carbon pricing isn't going to do that.
Professor Jessica Green studies climate governance at the University of Toronto. She disagrees that the carbon price is the right weapon in the fight to reduce emissions. It's become too tightly wrapped in partisanship to sell politically, she says, and just isn't worth it.
I think at the end of the day, what's become clear is that carbon pricing isn't worth the political costs. If the federal government or provincial governments need to invest a lot of political resources in putting in place climate policies, then carbon pricing is just the wrong horse to pick.
So, is this carbon policy worth the heat? To talk about this, Stephen Guilbeault is the federal Environment Minister. Welcome back to the House.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
Let's pick up on what we just heard from Jessica Green. Is your government's carbon tax carve-out proof that the politics of carbon pricing don't really work?
No, I respectfully disagree with her analysis. We've provided our own analysis this week, Environment and Climate Change Canada, the officials, that shows that carbon pricing has enabled us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by about a third since we've put it in place in 2019. And so it is not the only tool in our toolbox to fight climate change, for sure, but it is a very important one. So there's no way Canada can reach its 2030 commitments if we remove a tool that gives us a third of our emission reduction, unless the finance minister tells me that I have somehow access to unlimited sources of capital to invest in decarbonization in the transportation sector, in the building sector, in the industrial sector, in the oil and gas sector, which I doubt she will do. We need
You
carbon
take it,
pricing.
though, to be clear.
Yeah.
Listen, we will get to your 2030 goals in a moment. I want to talk, though, about this idea of carve-outs. You have said very clearly no more carve-outs, but as you know, the Senate could pass Bill C234, which would give exemptions to some farmers for natural gas and propane use. Were you wrong, Minister Guilbeault, to promise something, no more carve-outs, that's actually beyond your control right now?
Well, I said that, and you probably heard the Prime Minister loud and clear on that as well, who also said that there would be no more carve-outs. So it's not just the Environment and Climate Change Minister that has said that, but the Prime Minister has said it as well. As you well know, the Liberal government doesn't control senators anymore. The vast majority of senators that are in the Senate now are independent senators that we've nominated, but there's only a handful of remaining Liberal senators. We don't tell senators what to do or how to vote or not to vote. The Conservative Party does that with their Conservative senators. We don't do that. And we'll see what happens in the Senate.
I don't actually understand how that answers the question. You promised no more carve-outs. The Senate could put in place another carve-out. Why did you make the promise?
Well, we'll see what the Senate does, and then we'll see how the government reacts to an eventual decision that the Senate will take on this. I don't think it should be taken as a given that the Senate will necessarily pass this. We'll have to see. I'm not saying one way or the other, but the decision hasn't been made yet by the Senate.
Are you saying that you are trying to sway some of them not to vote for this carve-out? Are you making a pitch to them?
I've had conversations with some senators on that particular bill. But again, we don't dictate how senators vote in the Senate. The Conservative Party does that. We don't.
Okay. Given that you have said that there will be no more exemptions as long as you are Environment Minister, does this piece of legislation put your job on the line? Would you have to resign as Environment Minister if there's another exemption?
As I've said, Catherine, we don't know what the Senate will do with this bill and then how the House will react to an eventual decision. And the Prime Minister has said that as well. You've heard the Prime Minister, like I have, say that there would be no more exemption to carbon pricing.
But you have said that it will not happen as long as you are Environment Minister. So I am trying to understand, are you saying that the principle here is if there is another exemption, you will stop being the Environment Minister?
I'm confident that there will be no more exemption to carbon pricing, as the Prime Minister has said.
Chris Reagan told us that the future of climate policy depends on your government not unraveling the carbon price. Do you agree that the future of your signature policy is at stake?
As I said earlier in the interview, we can't achieve our 2030 targets without carbon pricing. So we need this to continue on if we want to achieve our 2030 climate goals. as I said, it's providing almost 30%, not quite 30%, but almost 30% of the emissions reduction. There are no other measures out there that I can replace carbon pricing with that would provide as much emission reduction and pollution reduction. So I would agree with Mr. Regan. We need carbon pricing.